Gender and consumer culture. To what extent has it changed? In the 21st century, a time where human rights and the Me Too movement has empowered thousands of women to speak up and demand to be heard for their injustice, there has been an explosion into the news and the internet of the woman's voice, and with this, a demand to change the narrative around the way that society view women.
Taking a public stand against sexual abuse and harassment.
Stop the violence! Stop the rape!
There is a strong fight against sexism and misogyny and for equality. People are marching and protesting in the streets as they fight against what many view to be an inherent part of our capitalistic system. There is a clear sense of challenging the status quo that still includes gender pay gaps, racism, homophobia, and generally an unfairness in opportunities for women in comparison to men. This is a clear indication that the general public are expressing disappointment and anger towards the system that, through consumer culture, reinforces ideologies of gendered boundaries. We see advertisements aimed at men that objectify the female body and benefit from over-sexualizing females. This is a sign of inequalities in gender representation when we draw our attention to consumer culture and advertisement. I want to see if there has been any improvements within the advertisement industry and if through waves of feminism there has been a strong impact on changing gender representation. I will be drawing our attention to the 70s, 90s and 21st century waves of feminism to see a clear indication of change or lack of it. Within the first wave of feminism, women marched for the vote and wanted an inch of power, but to an extent they still accepted that their place was still at home, aka the private sphere, and that the man's place was out in the world, making change and making decisions. Women still focused their lives around marriage, children, and the domestics, staying in the kitchen and the bedroom. And when we take a look at the gender roles represented in advertisement throughout this time, there is a clear reflection of these ideologies.
How can such a pretty wife make such bad coffee?
I've set out a brand new, can't-miss, husband-pleasing coffee.
One thing that really sticks out within advertisement in earlier years is the continual repetition of cis, white, straight stereotypes of family dynamics. We see a clear depiction of the ideal lifestyle, where distinct male and female roles are always framed in binary spheres, and the product themselves fit within this. So it was of no surprise that this wasn't pleasing women. They were left feeling very unsatisfied and feeling very trapped and limited, socially and politically. Because of this, women reacted to change in a very positive way, as it came with expanding this narrow, fixed idea on what a woman's life should look like.
Just great.
But can she still take care of you?
Just fine, Mom, really.
Within the second wave of feminism, women's lives had now been transformed by some advances in their working lives, politics, law, and medicine. For example, some were now able to think about careers as well as jobs, as we saw the invention of the pill. By giving women control over their fertility, women were no longer falling pregnant and having to give up the rest of their future plans. Instead, women, especially in America, started to study particular kinds of degrees such as law, medicine, dentistry, MBAs, which had previously been very masculine. Everyone started to marry later, even women who didn't use the pill. They were able to consider divorce in ways that would have scandalized their mothers and grandmothers of generations that came before them. This was a huge step for women's liberation. However, much of these advances were very limited and progress was pretty slow. Popular culture reflected a very highly sexist society still. This was clearly apparent in the growing consumer culture of the time, and a good example of this can be seen in advertisement. Whilst the media and the TV continued to present gender in these ways, some academic and social critiques continued to question these concepts. One such critique was the concept of the male gaze. The concept was first used by John Burgon in Ways of Looking, a series of films for the BBC in 1972. Although Burgon was exploring this concept via images, in a more traditional Western cultural aesthetic, by raising questions about hidden ideologies in visual images, it was essential for the development of the male gaze theory in other forms that we acknowledge in today's forms of media, as I focus on in advertisement. This concept later evolved into feminist film theory as the term male gaze, and this was introduced by scholar and filmmaker Laura Mulvey. Laura Mulvey and her theory of the male gaze was introduced by the works of Freud, and to this day is one of the most significant feminist film theory moments and has been of great influence since the mid-1970s. The gaze refers to how we look at visual representation. This includes advertisement, television programs, and cinema. The male gaze involves the sexual politics of the gaze and suggests a sexualized way of looking that empowers men and objectifies women. Within the male gaze, the female is visually positioned as the object of the heterosexual male desire. The audience have a reflection from the TV back at them that the concept of the right way to live is through these binaries of gender roles. Often, editors will highlight this with specific conceptions such as slow motion shots of the female. We follow the male gaze into the 90s. We see another wave of feminism where things became more individualistic as feminists came online in the late 1990s to early 2000s and reached a global audience with blogs and social media. They broadened their goals, focusing on abolishing gender roles, stereotypes, and expanding feminism to include women with diverse racial and cultural identities. The third wave of feminism was known as the Riot Girl. The Riot Girl was a subcultural movement that combined feminism, punk music, and politics. Based on hardcore punk rock, the movement created art, talked about rape, the patriarchy, sexuality, the female empowerment. It started chapters and supported and organised women in music in ways that had not been seen before. Some felt that things were looking up for women in the 90s. These were the daughters of the second wave of feminism. If you were to turn your TV on, you would find a different version of the 90s staring back at you. You might think, if anything, things have actually gotten worse.
She's got style, she's got great.
Now with Lux Shower Liquid.
We saw a shift in consumerism and the market widened with the invention of the internet. This created another platform for advertisement, and there was now an opportunity to sell more products to men using the same sexist tricks of the past. Women were still used as sexualized objects attached to the product being sold. Messages such as, buy this deodorant, car, food, and all the girls will want to sleep with you. Laura Mulvey states that advertising uses and embodies the male gaze, fetishizing women's bodies in order to make a profit. Jane Kilburn. Advertising creates a cultural climate that validates false body images for women and legitimizes sexual violence. In the end, the 1990s didn't advance equality very much for women and girls. Rather, the decade was marked by a shocking extreme effort to subordinate them. As women gained power or just showed up in public, society pushed back by reducing them to gruesome sexual fantasies and misogynistic stereotypes. Women's careers, clothes, bodies, and families were skewered. Nothing was off limits for women of the 90s, but the sexism continued into shows such as Sex and the City and other forms of media, where women were expected to be more concerned about their looks, gossip, and sex than they were to be viewed as independent and driven.
What I've been reading in this great new book. It says that if you really want to get married, you shouldn't be spending so much time around dysfunctional single women.
In 2004, this suggestive ad caused an outcry from Burger King's new Super Saver Incher sandwich that was a clear indication to oral sex. What's more is it later became clear that the model being used in the poster had no idea what her image was going to be used for. In 2014, McDonald's came under fire for literally comparing women to food in the UK for this poster of their French fries. Needless to say, their campaign was short-lived. 2021, the ban of sexist advertisement. Have things finally started to improve? We spend more time now than ever on our digital devices, TV, laptop, phone screens, and with a more connected sphere, there are numerous opportunities with a platform to speak up and stand up for justice and instigate change. This is where we saw the fourth wave of feminism. The fourth wave feminism is a feminist movement that began around 2012 and is characterized by a focus on the empowerment of women, the use of the internet tools, and intersectionality. Equal opportunity sought for girls and women should expand also to boys and men to overcome gender norms, for example by expressing emotions and feelings freely. This wave included the expansion of the white woman's struggle to the woman of colour, a new openness to gay rights, the rise of queer theory, the revolution of feminist fashion choices and sex-positive feminism, and the expansion on academic women's study to other groups defined by gender, such as masculinity or trans studies. It seems there is a resurgence of the fight against sexism now, although adverts are still being made with sexist comments and stereotypes. Some of the worst offenders encourage controversy and are equally taken down. But some say that the main problem is that there are not enough women in the drawing board stages of advertisement, and thus there is still not enough of a female's perspective to point out the blatant, obvious sexism that we see sometimes in advertisement today. Yet we do see some adverts attempt to challenge the stereotypes of gender roles. With the modern day feminist movement, there is definitely a pressure that comes with a louder voice. Adverts are more aware of their audience's needs, that people want fair pay for the worker, makeup that hasn't been used on animals, true representation of gender roles, and generally a more forward-thinking, progressive society reflected back at them. Let's take a look at some adverts that have modernised their campaigns. Heineken released a new, more gender-fluid advert with the slogan, "Men drink cocktails too." Though this is progressive, the advert feels silly and almost like this is a subject that is just the tip of the iceberg of problems when it comes to gender stereotypes and the effect that these messages have within society. Should we really have to explain that any gender can order any drink? It seems ridiculous that this is a trendy, hip ad pushing the boundaries, when in reality, it is slightly devastating that we haven't gotten past even the drink you order at a bar. The question here that is also worthy of noting is, if a company is advertising in an ethical, non-sexist way, how much of this is genuinely based on the company's beliefs in these views at their core, opposed to the company being aware that this is what the consumer needs/wants to hear in order for them to purchase the product and thus for the company to make money? And if we take a quick look at the history of Heineken's advertisements, we'd see the opposite is reflected in their adverts. Therefore, strengthening the idea that Heineken have done this to be trendy. For too long, it has been normalised for men to have sexual desire over women, and for the female to have no say in their own sexuality within advertisement. So has the fourth wave of feminism had any effect at all on consumer culture? Indeed it has. In the liberation of females taking ownerships of their bodies in terms of breastfeeding and menstruation adverts.
NBC agreed to air their ad focused on breastfeeding during the Golden Globes.
I can't believe it's taken this long, honestly. Yeah, it'll be the first breastfeeding ad to ever air on network television, and we can show it to you right now.
You've got this. Latch. And oh God, unlatch. And plug. And good mom should know how to do this. And am I a bad mom if I stop now?
And my doctor said cabbage. And do I love my baby?
And cluster feeding.
So much milk.
Not enough milk. And what even is enough milk?
And flatten the nipple.
And I just want to feed my baby.
Yes! It needs to be. I mean, I made a breastfeeding product because this is something that a lot of women go through. It should be normalized. This is nothing to be ashamed of. This is something that should be celebrated. It's natural, it's nature. And I think that it being pulled off and not being able to air was a huge mistake. And I think that now having it be on the Golden Globes is exactly where it should be. And I'm really proud of Freedom Mamas. We're friends with them. I think it's just fantastic.
Yeah, I agree with you, Cheryl. We got to normalize breastfeeding. It's really messed up that we only allow breasts to be in media when it's sexualized, which is not even the intended purpose of that body part.
These are powerful adverts within the 21st century, because these examples of women owning their bodies would have been near impossible to appear in the media, be that on TV or in magazines, in earlier times. So this is a definite development and a positive change for females. So it's clear there has been a certain shift in the advertisement reaching the consumer's more ethical needs. As great as these small steps are, we can't ignore the fact that if you were to turn the channel over in the same year, 2020, we saw the ban of KFC's new Singer popcorn box, after consumers deemed it highly inappropriate for consciously allowing the message "boys will be boys" to excuse sexist behaviour, proving that the over-sexualization of the female body is still being used today to sell products. KFC released a statement in response to this consumer complaint, leading to the taking down of their ad. We apologise if anyone was offended by our latest commercial. Our intention was not to stereotype women and young boys in a negative light, and whilst I agree with the rights group that we definitely shouldn't be teaching boys to partake in behaviour that is harmful towards women, I mostly feel like their efforts would have been better placed elsewhere. With this reply, and a clear ignorance to see the deeper problem that these kind of ads carry, comes the theory again of the male gaze. Within cinematic narrative, the male gaze has three perspectives. Firstly, that of the man behind the camera, the male viewer. Secondly, that of the male character within the film's cinematic representation. And thirdly, that of the spectator gazing at the image. And although this is a theory that first was coined through the lens of cinematic layout, there are identical findings in the advertisement and media, especially if we look at these three factors. We see these exact concepts in the now banned 2020 KFC Singer Burger advert. So, it is clear that there are deep rules and concepts that the media churn over and over again, and we have seen this over the years in my examples. There have been improvements for women's rights, and we are seeing more women have a seat at the table. And we hear a lot of conversation that things seem to be getting better, and there seems to be change happening, and it can appear that way if you think of it in terms of the extreme. From women not having the right to vote just 40 years ago, to now being able to have careers and control over their sexuality. Through each new wave of feminism, we see there is a shadow of sexism that bleeds into the next, and this is clear in advertisement. There is still a battle for equality that is deeper than just gender equality. The Me Too movement was used by more than 4.7 million people and had 12 million posts during the first 24 hours. If we had truly evolved, even the forward-thinking ads wouldn't be of any interest to comment on in the first place. There wouldn't be this pat-on-the-back mentality when an ad finally shows gender roles expressed in a more realistic manner. So it appears that unfortunately, as it stands, the battle continues and the marches continue. We will most likely see more waves of feminism to come that evolve with the advancements of technology in the future that again reinforce past demands for equality and use newer ways to tackle injustice. And hopefully one day that will be enough to create equality for all.